Captain Jake Morrison stood at the window of his ship, looking down at the planet below. Zelthara Prime glowed like a giant blue jewel in space. Its surface was covered with crystal towers that reached up toward the stars. Jake had never seen anything so beautiful or so scary at the same time. "Captain, they're ready for us," said Dr. Lisa Parker, walking up behind him. She was the team's language expert. Her job was to help humans talk to aliens without starting a war. Jake nodded and turned away from the window. Today was the most important day in human history. They were about to meet the Zeltharan Empire for the first time. The Zeltharans ruled over dozens of star systems. Their ships could destroy planets. Their technology was so advanced that it seemed like magic to humans. "Are you nervous?" asked Ben Carter, the team's culture expert. He studied how different alien species lived and thought. "Terrified," Jake said with a small smile. "But that's normal, right?" The three humans walked through their ship, the UES Harmony. It was Earth's newest and best ship, but it looked like a toy next to the massive Zeltharan vessels floating nearby. Those ships were made of the same crystal material as the buildings on the planet. They seemed to glow with their own light. Jake looked at his reflection in a mirror as they passed. He was wearing his best uniform, but he wondered if it would be good enough. The Zeltharans had invited humans to visit their homeworld. This was a huge honor. Most alien species never got this chance. "Remember what we learned about their culture," Lisa said as they reached the transport room. "They value order above everything else. They like things to be perfect and unchanging. They think chaos and unpredictability are bad things." "Right," Ben added. "And they've been ruling this part of space for thousands of years. To them, we're just another young species that needs guidance." Jake felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Earth had only been traveling between stars for 50 years. Humans were like children compared to the Zeltharans. But they had something to offer, didn't they? They had to. The transport beam activated, and suddenly the three humans were standing in a room made entirely of crystal. The walls, floor, and ceiling all sparkled with soft blue light. The air felt different here, cleaner somehow. "Welcome, representatives of Earth," said a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Three tall figures walked into the room. Jake's breath caught in his throat. The Zeltharans were even more impressive in person than in the videos Earth had received. They stood nearly 8 feet tall. Their skin looked like it was made of living crystal, shifting between blue and silver. Their eyes glowed with soft white light. The one in the middle wore a crown made of the same crystal material. This had to be Princess Cathara, heir to the Zeltharan throne. Jake had studied everything Earth knew about her. She was said to be brilliant, cold, and completely dedicated to her empire's goals. "I am Princess Cathara," she said. Her voice was musical but distant, like wind chimes in a cold breeze. "I welcome you to our world." Jake stepped forward and bowed slightly as they had practiced. "Thank you, Your Highness. I am Captain Jake Morrison. This is Dr. Lisa Parker and Ben Carter. We are honored to be here." The princess looked at them with curiosity, the way a scientist might look at an interesting insect. "You may follow me. We have much to discuss." They walked through hallways that seemed to stretch forever. Everything was perfect. The walls had no scratches or marks. The floors were so clean they reflected like mirrors. There were no random decorations or personal touches anywhere. It was beautiful, but it felt empty to Jake. Other Zeltharans moved through the halls with smooth, practiced steps. They all looked similar, and they all moved in the same careful way. Nobody ran or laughed or seemed to be in a hurry. It was like watching a perfectly choreographed dance. "Your species is young," Princess Cathara said as they walked. "But you have shown promise. You have learned to travel between stars without destroying yourselves. This is more than many species achieve." "We've had our problems," Jake admitted. "But we're learning." "Indeed. That is why we have invited you here. The Zeltharan Empire offers protection to promising young species. Under our guidance, you could grow and prosper." They entered a huge room with a ceiling that seemed to disappear into the sky above. The walls were covered with star maps showing the entire Zeltharan Empire. Hundreds of star systems, thousands of worlds, all under their control. "This is impressive," Ben said, looking around in wonder. "It is the result of order and careful planning," the princess replied. "When species join our empire, they give up the chaos of independence. In return, they receive peace, stability, and protection." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The princess made it sound like a generous offer, but he could hear what she really meant. Join us or we'll make you join us. What would this arrangement look like for humanity? Lisa asked carefully. Princess Kythera gestured to a chair made of crystal. Jake sat down, feeling very small in the huge room. The princess remained standing, looking down at him. You would maintain your current government structure, she said, but all major decisions would require our approval. Your military would be dissolved. Your ships would be limited to travel within your own system. In exchange, you would have our protection and access to some of our technology. Jake's heart sank. This wasn't a partnership. This was surrender with extra steps. Earth would become just another controlled world in the Zeltharan Empire. We appreciate the offer, Jake said carefully, but we would need time to consider such a significant decision. The princess nodded as if she had expected this response. Of course. You may tour our world and see the benefits of joining our empire. Many species have found great happiness under our guidance. As they left the meeting room, Jake caught Ben's eye. His friend looked as worried as Jake felt. This wasn't going the way they had hoped. Earth needed allies, not masters, but they were here now on an alien world far from home. They had to find a way to change the princess's mind about humanity. They had to show her that humans had something valuable to offer as equals, not subjects. The question was, what could 3 humans possibly do to impress beings who had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years? The next morning, Princess Kythera offered to show the human visitors around the royal gardens. Jake was grateful for the break from the formal meetings. The negotiations had not gone well the day before. Every proposal the humans made was politely dismissed. Every alternative they suggested was met with the same response: join the Empire or remain unprotected in a dangerous galaxy. The gardens were unlike anything Jake had ever seen. Massive crystal trees rose hundreds of feet into the air, their branches forming perfect geometric patterns. Flowers made of living light bloomed in exact rows, each one identical to the next. Streams of liquid that looked like melted silver flowed through channels carved with mathematical precision. This is beautiful, Lisa said, and she meant it. The gardens were stunning. Thank you, Princess Kythera replied. These gardens have remained unchanged for 3,000 years. Each element is positioned for maximum aesthetic effect and perfect balance. Jake walked beside one of the silver streams, watching the liquid flow. Everything here was controlled, planned, perfect. But something felt wrong. It took him a moment to figure out what it was. Where are the insects? He asked suddenly. The princess looked confused. Insects? On Earth, gardens are full of life. Bees, butterflies, birds, things that move around randomly, making noise, changing things. Jake gestured at the perfect flowers around them. This is beautiful, but it feels dead, Ben finished quietly. Princess Kythera's crystal features hardened slightly. We eliminated such chaotic elements long ago. They served no purpose except to disrupt the harmony we had created. But they were part of what made it alive, Jake said. He immediately regretted the words. He was supposed to be diplomatic, not critical. To his surprise, the princess didn't seem angry. Instead, she looked thoughtful. Alive, she repeated slowly. An interesting concept. You equate chaos with life? Not chaos exactly, Jake said, choosing his words carefully. Change, growth, the unexpected. On Earth, we believe that things that never change aren't really living. They walked deeper into the gardens. The princess showed them sculptures that had stood in the same positions for millennia, art forms that would never decay or alter. Everything was preserved in eternal perfection. Our ancestors created different forms of beauty, the princess said after a long silence, but they were impermanent. They would change, fade, die. Such things were deemed inefficient by the Great Reformation. What kind of things? Lisa asked gently. Organic art forms. Living sculptures. Gardens that grew wild and changed with the seasons. The princess paused beside a fountain that created perfect crystal spirals in the air. My grandmother told me stories about them when I was young. But stories are all that remain. Jake heard something in her voice that he hadn't expected. Sadness, longing. It was hard to tell with the musical tones of the Zeltharan language, but he thought he detected something almost wistful. They continued walking through the perfectly maintained paths. Jake found himself thinking about his small quarters on the ship. Before leaving Earth, he had packed a few personal items to remind him of home. Among them was a small potted sunflower that his sister had given him. Your Highness, Jake said suddenly, would it be acceptable for me to offer you a gift? The princess stopped walking. her glowing eyes fixed on him with interest. A gift? That would be unexpected. What manner of gift? Something from Earth. It's small and probably not valuable by your standards, but it means something to humans. Princess Kithara nodded slowly. I would be honored to receive such a gift. An hour later, Jake returned with the small pot containing a sunflower. It was just a young plant, barely 6 inches tall, with broad green leaves and a thick stem. To Zeltharan eyes, it must have looked incredibly primitive. This is a sunflower, Jake explained, holding the pot carefully. It's a living plant from Earth. It will grow and change over time. Eventually, it will produce a large yellow flower, then seeds, then it will die. But while it lives, it will be beautiful in its own way. The princess took the pot with both hands, examining the small plant with curiosity. Her attendants whispered among themselves in their musical language. Jake caught a few words that Lisa had taught him. They were confused by the gift. Some seemed to think it was crude or inappropriate. It is so small, the princess said, but not in a mocking way. She sounded genuinely interested. And you say it will change? Every day, Jake confirmed. No two sunflowers are exactly alike. They grow differently depending on their environment. This one will be unique. Unique. The princess repeated the word as if it were foreign to her, which Jake realized it probably was. In a society that valued perfect uniformity, uniqueness might be seen as a flaw. We should place it in your chambers, Your Highness, one of her attendants said, as a diplomatic courtesy. The princess nodded, but she didn't hand the pot to her attendant. She continued to hold it herself, studying the small plant. You said it seeks the sun? That's why it's called a sunflower, Jake explained. As it grows, it will turn its face toward the light. It will follow the sun across the sky each day. Fascinating, the princess murmured. A plant that chooses its own direction. They finished the tour of the gardens, but Jake noticed that Princess Kithara kept glancing down at the sunflower in her hands. She asked several more questions about it. How long would it live? How much would it grow? What did the flowers look like? Jake answered as best he could, but he realized that he was describing concepts that didn't exist in Zeltharan culture. Growth, change, individual variation. Natural death followed by new life. These ideas seemed to fascinate and puzzle the princess. As they walked back toward the palace, Jake noticed something else. The princess's steps had become less formal, less perfectly controlled. She was walking more slowly, taking time to really look at things around her. It was as if the simple act of holding a living, growing plant had changed something in her. When they reached the palace entrance, the princess finally handed the pot to one of her attendants. Place this in my private chambers, she instructed. Be very careful with it. Of course, Your Highness, the attendant replied, though Jake could see the confusion in the alien's glowing eyes. Captain Morrison, the princess said, turning back to Jake. This gift is most unusual. I am curious to observe how this sunflower will develop. I hope you enjoy watching it grow, Jake said with a smile. As the humans were escorted back to their quarters, Jake felt a small spark of hope. For the first time since arriving on Zelthara Prime, he had seen the princess react to something with genuine interest rather than polite diplomatic courtesy. It was just a flower, he reminded himself, a simple plant that would grow for a few weeks, bloom once, and then die. But something in the princess's reaction told him that this small gift might be more important than anyone realized. That night, as Jake lay in his crystal bed looking up at the alien stars through his window, he wondered what Princess Kithara was thinking about. Was she watching the sunflower? Was she thinking about growth, change, and the beauty of impermanent things? He had no way of knowing that at that very moment, the princess was indeed standing in her chambers, studying the small plant by the light of Zelthara's 3 moons. For the first time in her long life, she was looking at something that would surprise her tomorrow. Princess Kithara found herself visiting the sunflower 3 times on the first day. This was highly unusual behavior for her. Zeltharan royalty followed strict schedules that had been perfected over centuries. There was no time allocated for staring at primitive plants. But the small green thing fascinated her in a way she couldn't explain. When she woke that morning, the first thing she noticed was that one of the leaves had changed position slightly. It was such a tiny difference that her attendants would never have noticed it. But to someone who had spent her entire life surrounded by unchanging perfection, even the smallest variation was remarkable. By the second day, she could see that the plant had actually grown. The stem was taller, and new leaves were beginning to unfurl. She found herself canceling a meeting with the Trade Council to spend an extra few minutes watching it. "Your Highness," said her chief attendant, "Vexhai, the human delegation is requesting another audience." "Later," Kythera replied, not taking her eyes off the sunflower. "Has this leaf always been this size?" Vexhai looked at the plant with obvious confusion. I do not know, Your Highness. Shall I research the growth patterns of this earth organism?" "No," Kythera said quickly. "I want to observe it myself." This was another break from tradition. Zeltharan nobles never conducted their own research. They had specialists for such things. But something about watching the sunflower change made Kythera want to understand it personally. She began keeping a detailed record of the plant's growth. Each morning she would note any changes in height, leaf size, or position. She sketched its progress in a journal that she kept hidden from her attendants. If anyone knew that the heir to the Zeltharan throne was drawing pictures of a primitive plant, it would cause a scandal. By the end of the first week, the sunflower had doubled in height. Small buds were beginning to form at the top of the stem. Kythera found herself excited about what would happen next. Excitement was another emotion that Zeltharan culture discouraged. Anticipation suggested that the present moment was somehow inadequate, which contradicted their philosophy of eternal perfection. "The human plant continues to grow," she mentioned to her father. Emperor Vorthak during their daily meeting. The emperor looked displeased. "Why are you still thinking about such trivial matters? Have you made progress on convincing the humans to accept our protection?" "They are resistant to our standard terms," Kythera admitted. "Then make the terms clearer. They will join our empire, or they will be left to face the dangers of space alone. There are many hostile species that would be happy to destroy Earth." Kythera nodded, but her mind kept drifting back to the sunflower. Captain Morrison had said that no two sunflowers were exactly alike. What did that mean? How could members of the same species be different from each other? That evening, she did something unprecedented. She accessed the Imperial database and began researching human culture. What she found amazed and confused her. Humans created art that was never meant to last. They wrote songs about temporary emotions. They celebrated the changing of seasons, as if the passage of time was something to be enjoyed rather than endured. Most shocking of all, they seemed to value individual differences among their own kind. She read about human concepts like creativity, spontaneity, and personal expression. These ideas were so foreign to Zeltharan thinking that she had trouble understanding them. In her culture, the highest goal was to achieve perfect harmony with established patterns. Individual variation was seen as a flaw to be corrected. But as she watched her sunflower grow and change each day, she began to wonder if there might be beauty in imperfection. The breakthrough came on the 10th day. Kythera entered her chambers to find that the sunflower had begun to bloom. The large bud at the top of the stem was opening, revealing hints of bright yellow petals inside. She stood frozen in amazement. In all her centuries of life, she had never seen anything so beautiful. The color was unlike anything in Zeltharan art. Their crystals could produce many hues, but this warm, living yellow was completely different. It seemed to capture and hold the light in a way that made her want to keep looking at it forever, but it was more than just the color. It was the fact that she hadn't known this was going to happen today. The sunflower had surprised her. When was the last time anything had surprised a member of the Zeltharan royal family? She spent the entire day in her chambers, watching the flower complete its transformation. By evening, the sunflower was in full bloom, its bright yellow petals arranged in a perfect spiral pattern around a dark center filled with developing seeds. "Your Highness," Vexhai said, entering the room with her evening meal, "you have missed 4 scheduled appointments today." Kythera didn't respond. She was studying the flower's pattern, noticing how mathematical it was despite being completely natural. The spirals in the center followed a sequence that humans called the Fibonacci numbers, though she didn't know that yet. All she knew was that this random, chaotic, living thing had created something more beautiful than all the carefully planned art in her palace. "Cancel my appointments tomorrow as well," she said finally. "Your Highness, I cannot do that. You have a meeting with the human delegation, and your father expects a report on their decision." Kythera looked up from the sunflower for the first time in hours. "The humans," she said thoughtfully. "Yes, I need to speak with them." That night she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about what Captain Morrison had said about growth, change, and the beauty of temporary things. She thought about human art that was created to last only a short time. She thought about their music that celebrated feelings instead of eternal truths. And she thought about her empire. Thousands of worlds, billions of beings, all controlled and ordered according to Zeltharan principles. All required to give up their individual ways of thinking and behaving. All forced to become perfect copies of Zeltharan ideals. For the first time in her life, Princess Kythera began to wonder if perfection might not be the highest goal after all. The next morning, she made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. Instead of demanding that the humans accept Zeltharan protection, she would ask them to teach her more about their strange concepts of growth and change. She looked at the sunflower, now in full magnificent bloom, and realized that Captain Morrison had given her more than just a plant. He had given her a new way of seeing the universe. The question was, what would she do with this new vision? And would her people, her father, her empire be able to accept the changes that were already beginning to bloom in her mind? As she prepared for another meeting with the human delegation, Princess Kythera felt something she had never experienced before. She felt curious about her own future, excited about possibilities she couldn't predict. She felt for the first time in her long life truly alive. The change in Princess Kythera was impossible to hide. When she met with the human delegation the next day, Jake could see it immediately. The cold, distant expression was gone. Instead, her crystal features seemed to glow with a warmth he had never seen before. "Captain Morrison," she said, "I have been thinking about our previous discussions. I believe I may have misunderstood something important about humanity." Jake exchanged glances with Lisa and Ben. This was not what they had expected. "What do you mean, Your Highness? You spoke of growth and change as if they were valuable things. This was confusing to me because our culture teaches that change is a form of chaos. But I have been observing your gift, and I think I am beginning to understand." She led them to a window that looked out over the Crystal City. "Look at our capital," she said. "Every building has stood in the same place for thousands of years. Every street follows the same pattern. Nothing ever changes. We call this perfection." "It is beautiful," Lisa said diplomatically. "Yes, but is it alive?" Kythera asked. "Your sunflower changes every day, and each change makes it more beautiful. What if change is not chaos but growth? What if perfection is not the absence of change but the ability to become something better?" Jake felt his heart racing. This was the breakthrough they had hoped for, but it was happening faster than he had dared to imagine. "Your Highness," Ben said carefully, "are you suggesting that the Zeltharan Empire might consider different approaches to governing other species?" "I am suggesting," Kythera said slowly, "that perhaps we have been wrong about many things." Word of the princess's changed attitude spread quickly through the royal court. Emperor Vorthak summoned his daughter for a private meeting that same evening. "What is this nonsense about learning from primitive species?" he demanded. His voice echoed through the throne room like crystal bells in a storm. "Father, I have been studying human culture. They have concepts that we have forgotten. Ideas about growth, creativity, individual expression. What if these things have value that we do not understand?" The Emperor's glow dimmed with displeasure. "Individual expression leads to chaos. Creativity disrupts order. We learned this lesson long ago during the time of troubles. Have you forgotten why we built this empire?" Kythera had not forgotten. The time of troubles was ancient history now, but every Zeltharan child learned about it. Thousands of years ago, their homeworld had been torn apart by war between different groups who all had different ideas about how society should work. The chaos had nearly destroyed their civilization. "But what if we went too far in the other direction?" Kythera asked. "What if we eliminated not just harmful chaos but also beneficial change?" "There is no such thing as beneficial change," the Emperor said firmly. "Change leads to conflict. Conflict leads to destruction. We have maintained peace for 3,000 years by eliminating the sources of change. And yet," Kythera said quietly, "I have never felt as alive as I have in these past few days, watching something grow and change." The Emperor stared at his daughter in shock. Feeling alive was not considered a worthwhile goal in Zeltharan culture. Purpose, order, and service to the Empire were the only values that mattered. But Kythera's transformation was already spreading beyond the royal family. She had begun requesting cultural items from the human delegation: seeds, art, music recordings, books about human philosophy. She studied them in secret, but secrets were hard to keep in the royal palace. Her personal attendants noticed that she had started a small garden in a hidden room. She was growing earth plants, each one different from the last. She spent hours watching them, sketching them, trying to understand how they could be so beautiful while being so unpredictable. Young Zeltharans who worked in the palace began to hear rumors about the princess's strange new interests. A few of them became curious enough to seek her out. They asked careful questions about the human concepts she was studying. "Is it true that humans believe individuals should be different from each other?" asked Zethmira, a young court official. "They don't just believe it," Kithara replied. "They celebrate it. They think diversity makes their society stronger, not weaker." These ideas were revolutionary to young Zeltharans who had spent their lives trying to fit perfectly into established patterns. Some of them began to wonder what they might accomplish if they were allowed to think and act as individuals. The princess's changing views also affected her approach to governing the empire. When reports came in from conquered worlds, she began asking different questions. Instead of focusing only on compliance and order, she wanted to know about the unique cultures and ideas of the subject species. The Corvani rebels on Sigma 7 have developed new agricultural techniques, reported General Thexfar during a council meeting. "Destroy their farms and relocate them to standard production facilities," Emperor Vorthak ordered. "As usual." "Wait," Kithara interrupted. "What kind of agricultural techniques? Are they more efficient than our methods?" The general looked confused. "I do not know, Your Highness." "Does it matter?" "They are not following approved procedures." "It matters very much," Kithara said. "If they have developed better methods, we should learn from them, not destroy their work." The Emperor's eyes blazed with anger. "We do not learn from inferior species. We teach them to follow our superior methods. But what if our methods are not superior in every case?" Kithara asked. "What if different environments require different approaches? What if diversity of thought leads to better solutions?" The room fell silent. No one had ever heard a member of the royal family question the fundamental superiority of Zeltharan methods. News of these exchanges began to leak beyond the palace. On conquered worlds throughout the empire, subject species heard whispers that the heir to the throne was asking questions about their cultures instead of demanding their elimination. On Corvai, the agricultural rebels received an unexpected message. Instead of ordering their surrender, Princess Kithara requested detailed information about their farming techniques. She wanted to understand how they had adapted Zeltharan methods to work better in their environment. Similar requests went out to artists on Veldrin, engineers on Thorak, and philosophers on Nexar Prime. For the first time in centuries, the Empire was asking to learn from its subjects instead of simply commanding their obedience. The response was immediate and dramatic. Species that had been suppressed for generations began to hope that their unique contributions might finally be valued. Rebellions that had been based on desperation began to transform into movements focused on cultural renaissance. But the princess's transformation also created powerful enemies. Conservative nobles in the Zeltharan court saw her new ideas as a threat to everything they had built. They began to plot against her, whispering to the emperor that she had been corrupted by human influence. "The princess has lost her way," Duke Vorthek told the emperor in a private meeting. "She spends more time with primitive plants than with affairs of state. She questions decisions that have maintained order for millennia. This cannot continue." Emperor Vorthak listened to these concerns with growing worry. His daughter's behavior was becoming more erratic each day. She had even suggested inviting representatives from subject species to participate in imperial councils. Such an idea was not just radical, it was dangerous. Meanwhile, in her chambers, Princess Kithara sat beside her sunflower as it began to fade. The bright yellow petals were starting to wilt, and some had already fallen to the ground. According to human philosophy, this should be sad. The beautiful flower was dying. But Kithara was amazed to discover that she wasn't sad at all. She was filled with anticipation. The dying flower was producing seeds, dozens of them. Each seed carried the potential for a new plant, a new flower, a new surprise. As she carefully collected the seeds, she realized that she now understood something that had eluded her before. Growth required both creation and destruction, beginning and ending, change and renewal. The old had to make way for the new. Looking out at her crystal empire, she wondered if the same principle might apply to civilizations. Perhaps the Zeltharan Empire had achieved its perfection, and now it needed to change in order to continue growing. The seeds in her hand felt heavy with possibility. Each one could become something new and unexpected. Each one could surprise her. Tomorrow, she decided, she would plant them throughout the palace gardens. And she would see what grew from the marriage of Zeltharan order and human unpredictability. The Empire was about to discover that some changes, once they begin, cannot be stopped. The crisis came 6 months after Captain Jake Morrison had given Princess Kithra a simple sunflower. The royal gardens, once perfect examples of crystal precision, now contained patches of wild earth plants growing in seemingly random patterns. Sunflowers, roses, dandelions, and dozens of other species created splashes of organic color among the geometric crystal formations. Emperor Vorthak stood in the center of what had once been the most orderly garden in the galaxy, his crystal features dark with rage. "This ends today," he declared to his daughter. "You will destroy this chaos immediately, or you will renounce your claim to the throne." Princess Kithara, now calling herself simply Kithara the gardener, knelt beside a patch of wildflowers. Each bloom was different from the others, creating a tapestry of colors and shapes that no Zeltharan artist had ever imagined. "I cannot destroy them, Father," she said quietly. "They are teaching me too much." "Teaching you?" The Emperor's voice echoed across the garden. What could these primitive weeds possibly teach the heir to the Zeltharan throne? Kithra stood up, her hands covered in earth from the alien soil she had been nurturing. "They are teaching me that beauty comes not from perfection, but from growth. That strength comes not from controlling everything, but from adapting to change. That life is more valuable than order." Around them a crowd had gathered. Palace guards, court officials, and even some common citizens had come to witness this confrontation between old and new ways of thinking. Among them stood Jake Morrison and his human delegation, watching with amazement as their simple gift continued to transform an empire. "You speak like a human," Emperor Vorthak said with disgust. "You have forgotten what it means to be Zeltharan." "No, Father. I have remembered what it means to be alive." The Emperor raised his hand and energy began to gather around his crystal form. With one gesture, he could destroy every living plant in the garden. He could return everything to its previous state of perfect order. But before he could act, something unexpected happened. A voice called out from the crowd, "Your Majesty, wait!" A young Zeltharan stepped forward. It was Zethmira, the court official who had been secretly studying human philosophy with the princess. "Please, before you destroy the garden, look at what has grown here." She gestured to a section where Zeltharan crystal formations had been allowed to grow alongside earth plants. The results were breathtaking. The organic curves of the flowers complemented the geometric patterns of the crystals, creating art that was both ordered and chaotic, planned and spontaneous. "This is not destruction of our culture," Zethmira said. "This is evolution of it." Other young Zeltharans stepped forward, adding their voices to hers. They spoke of discoveries they had made by combining their traditional methods with ideas learned from subject species. Engineers who had improved their designs by studying organic structures. Artists who had created new forms of beauty by embracing imperfection. Scientists who had made breakthroughs by questioning established assumptions. Emperor Vorthak looked around in shock. This wasn't just his daughter's rebellion anymore. The ideas she had planted were spreading throughout his people like seeds on the wind. "You have all been corrupted," he said, but his voice lacked its previous certainty. "No," said General Thexvar, stepping out of the crowd. "We have been awakened." The general, once a fierce defender of traditional Zeltharan values, had been changed by reports from the outer worlds. Subject species who had been given permission to share their knowledge were producing remarkable innovations, agricultural techniques that increased food production, engineering methods that improved space travel, art forms that brought joy to worlds that had known only efficient functionality for centuries. "The Empire is stronger now than it has ever been," the general continued. "Not because we have imposed more control, but because we have learned to grow." Emperor Vorthak stood alone, surrounded by his own people who were calling for change. For the first time in his long reign, he felt uncertain. Kithra approached her father slowly, holding a handful of sunflower seeds. "These came from the original flower that Captain Morrison gave me," she said. "One gift has become hundreds of gifts. One small change has created endless possibilities." She offered the seeds to her father. "Plant one and watch it grow. See what I have seen. Feel what I have felt." The Emperor stared at the seeds in his daughter's outstretched hand. Such small things, these organic specks. How could they threaten an empire that had stood for thousands of years? But as he looked around at the faces of his people, he saw something he had never seen before in Zeltharan society. He saw hope, excitement, the anticipation of unknown possibilities. Maybe that was what he had been fighting against all along. Not chaos or destruction, but hope itself. After a long moment, Emperor Vorthak reached out and took one seed from his daughter's hand. The transformation of the Zeltharan Empire did not happen overnight, but it happened faster than anyone thought possible. Within a year, the rigid hierarchy that had controlled billions of lives for millennia had been replaced by something unprecedented. A cooperative alliance of diverse species working together as equals. Kythera, no longer a princess but now the elected coordinator of the new Intersystem Cultural Alliance, stood in what had once been the throne room. The crystal walls now hosted an art exhibition featuring works from dozens of different species. Corvani sculptures stood next to Veldran paintings and human photographs. Each piece was unique, and together they created something beautiful that no single culture could have achieved alone. Captain Jake Morrison walked through the exhibition with wonder. "I never imagined," he said to Kythera, "that one sunflower could lead to all this." "Neither did I," she replied. "But that is the beauty of growth. You never know what might bloom." They stopped before a massive crystal sculpture that seemed to grow like a living tree, its branches supporting living vines and flowering plants from a dozen different worlds. At its base, a small plaque read, "In memory of one sunflower, and the human who taught us that the most powerful force in the universe is not the ability to control change, but the courage to embrace it." Outside the palace, the gardens had become a symbol of the new alliance. Species from across the galaxy came to plant seeds from their homeworlds, creating an ever-changing tapestry of life that surprised and delighted visitors every day. Emperor Vorthak, now simply Elder Vorthak, tended a small patch in the corner of the garden. He had planted that first sunflower seed his daughter had given him, and watched it grow with the same wonder that had transformed her. It had taken him longer to understand, but he finally grasped what humans meant when they spoke of the beauty of temporary things. His sunflower had bloomed magnificently, produced seeds, and died. But its children now grew throughout the galaxy, carrying with them the message that growth, change, and diversity were not threats to be controlled, but gifts to be cherished. Jake often visited the gardens when his diplomatic duties brought him to the capital. He would stand among the impossible mixture of crystal and organic life, marveling at what had grown from his sister's simple gift. The last time he visited, he found Kythera kneeling beside a new patch of earth, planting seeds sent by a recently contacted species from the far edge of the galaxy. "What are those?" he asked. "I have no idea," she said with a smile that would have been impossible for a Zeltharan princess to make. "And that is exactly why I am excited to plant them." As they worked together in the soil, Jake realized that his simple gift had done more than change an empire. It had changed the entire galaxy's understanding of what was possible when different forms of life chose to grow together rather than apart. The sunflower was long gone, but its legacy bloomed eternal in the infinite diversity of a universe that had learned to embrace change as the most beautiful force of all. And in gardens throughout the galaxy, seeds that had traveled impossible distances continued to sprout, grow, and surprise anyone willing to watch with open eyes and an open heart.